Hi there. I have returned to speak today about two very interesting resources. First is the letter of Publius Lentulus to the Senate of Rome concerning Jesus Christ that has been discovered in the Middle Ages. And the second, the references of famous Jewish historian Josephus Flavius to Jesus in his book, The Antiquity of the Jews, and what references I have discovered at a very, very superficial investigation on the internet. So first, of course, we'll return to our dear Wikipedia to see what's the official authorized opinion about the letter of Lentulus. It's mysterious, same as the shroud. It appeared around 1460 and was printed in Germany first in the Life of Christ by Ludolf the Carthusian and in the introduction to the works of Saint Anselm. But according to the manuscript of Jena, the letter was found in 1421 by a certain Jakob of the Colonna family in an ancient Roman document sent to Rome from Constantinople. The estimation is that it must have been of Greek origin and translated into Latin during the 13th or the 14th century. But anyway, though we have here a 19th century scholar called Friedrich Münther who believed that he could trace the letter down to the time of Diocletian, this is generally not accepted by the present-day scholars as Wikipedia, and the letter is frequently regarded as apocryphal because let's consider these reasons. Very important. First, no governor of Jerusalem or procurator of Judea is known to have been called Lentulus. That's one. And second, the Roman governor would not have addressed the Senate in the way represented. However, the deeds of the divine Augustus, the book of Augustus, the Roman emperor, lists Publius Lentulus as being elected as a Roman consul during his reign that ended in 14 AD. So we have, in fact, a Publius Lentulus. I have checked for this. But anyway, let's see the last argument in support of this idea that it's just apocryphal is not what it pretends to be. The Roman writer cited the expressions prophet of truth, sons of men, or Jesus Christ. The former two are Hebrew idioms, and the third is taken from the New Testament, they say. All right, so let's see what the letter tells us about Jesus, because it's about his physical portrait and also his psychological assessment, so to say, yeah. So let's see, here it says, without any other introduction, Lentulus, the governor of the Jerusalemites, to the Roman Senate and people, greetings. There has appeared in our times, and there still lives a man of great power, virtue, called Jesus Christ. The people call him prophet of truth, his disciples son of God. He raises the dead and heals infirmities. He's a man of medium size. He has a venerable aspect, and his beholders can both fear and love him. His hair is of the color of the ripe hazelnut, straight down to the ears, but below the ears, wavy and curled, with a bluish and bright reflection flowing over his shoulders. It is parted in two on the top of the head, after the pattern of the Nazarenes. His brow is smooth and very cheerful, with a face without wrinkle or spot, embellished by a slightly reddish complexion. His nose and mouth are faultless. His beard is abundant, of the color of his hair, not long, but divided at the chin. His aspect is simple and mature. His eyes are blue-gray and bright. He is terrible in his reprimands, sweet and amiable in his admonitions, cheerful without loss of gravity. He was never known to laugh, but often to weep. His stature is straight, his hands and arms beautiful to behold. His conversation is grave, infrequent, and modest. He is the most beautiful among the children of men. So here we have a translation, of course. It sounds very impressive. Also, it is in agreement with what we know from the New Revelation in Gifts of Heaven, where I have read the portrait that the Lord himself gives us about him. It also appears to converge with the portraits given in the article volume, coming from the high priest Gamaliel, coming from Pontius Pilate. And as it says here, this description agrees with the so-called Apgar description of Jesus, as well as the description of Jesus given by Nicephorus Callistus and John Damascene and the Book of Painters of Mount Athos. So there are various other sources. We spoke about this description from the letters of Abgarus, and we spoke about the book concerning the correspondence between Jesus and Abgarus that can be found among the books of the New Revelation in the previous video about the look of Jesus. So anyway, let's see another reference here on WikiWand, where it is observed that, in the deeds of Augustus, indeed, there must be a quotation about Publius Lentulus as being elected as Roman consul during this reign of Augustus, ending in 14 AD. And I have found on the Internet Archive this book, The Deeds of the Divine Augustus, which is well recognized by Wikipedia. It's mainly a professional biography of the emperor. So it was completed just 1 month before the emperor's death, although the content says here was written years earlier and went through various revisions. And here it is, the document on Internet Archive. And we can see here page 56 is written by the hand of the emperor, beginning with that year in which Gnaeus and Publius Lentulus were consuls when the imposts failed. I furnished aid sometimes to 100,000 men and sometimes to more by supplying grain or money for the tribute from my own land and property. Now, I cannot give you very many additions to this. There is a transcription in Latin and one in Greek, but then it continues with other details. So I don't know exactly when this happened in time, but for sure this happened before 14 AD, so most probably it happened during the life of our Lord. This is the page of Augustus on Wikipedia. But though we have this reference that is not studied enough, we'll see that many other resources, such as Orthodox Wiki, I believe belongs to the Christian Orthodox Church's references on Wikipedia about the letter of Lentulus. It's said an allegedly apocryphal and pseudepigraphal letter, and as arguments that it is so, we can find exactly what was on Wikipedia about not having any Publius Lentulus as the governor of Judea preceding Pontius Pilate, because before him it was Valerius Gratus, and I have checked this. It appears to be valid on Wikipedia. We have this Pontius Pilatus and Valerius Gratus, and here is the little that you can find about him in Wikipedia, but to me the dates are not really reliable. It's just mainly one reference to Josephus, and if you look carefully into this huge book about the antiquity of the Jews, you won't find many chronological references. But anyway, let's go back to the Orthodox argument. If there had been a procurator of Syria, not a governor, he would have written to the emperor, not to the Senate, right? So this is somehow an inference. And the title, again, same as in Wikipedia, the title Jesus Christus was not used as early as this. While the expressions prophet of truth and sons of man are Hebrew idioms. So being Hebrew idioms, they may be forbidden to be used by the Romans, I suppose, isn't it? Yeah, the Catholics on the other side, if you look here on the newadvent.org, declare this as clearly fake, because, as they say, Publius Lentulus is a fictitious person said to have been the governor of Judea before Pontius. So there's absolutely no reference to the book of Emperor Augustus. And so in the presentation, it starts again with Lentulus, the governor of the Jerusalemites, to the Roman Senate and people, greetings. So this tradition is very much similar to that on Wikipedia. Another Catholic research, Catholicism, academic dictionaries and encyclopedias. It's exactly the same as the previous, a fictitious person being Publius Lentulus, said to be governor of Judea before Pontius, right? And the text appears to be similar. The same presentation, Lentulus, the governor of the Jerusalemites, to the Roman Senate. And here's a short history, and we can see that what we can find on Wikipedia corresponds almost literally with this. We can find also some evangelical references. You see words, events, and the Bible, proclaiming loud and clear that the description of Jesus' letter is a hoax, updated a year ago. And here the author Brandon Ward speaks about the discovery of this description of Jesus coming from the so-called Publius Lentulus, and adds to this that the famous Christian scholar Dr. Edgar G. Goodspeed has debunked this. I have mentioned Dr. Goodspeed. Here he is, a real theologian and professor, scholar of Greek and the New Testament, who also seemingly debunked the article volume. With very few words, in fact. In his famous book, Modern Apocrypha, it seems he deals with 16 famous biblical hoaxes, and among them is this description of Jesus. He says the description appears in the longer form of a letter from Publius Lentulus, governor of Judea, to the Roman Senate. This is in medieval manuscripts, and gives us the letter without the presentation of the author as governor. And he says it is probably as old as the 13th century, but it was unknown to Christian antiquity and has no claims to serious attention as throwing any light upon the personal appearance of Jesus. It's not a very scientific assessment, same as the one given to the article volume. Of course, not even the best theologian in the world cannot be aware of everything that has been published during Christian antiquity, considering that we are left with just a fraction of the production of Christian antiquity, obviously, and also that there's a lot in the Library of Vatican and other more or less secret libraries that has not been disclosed to the public or even to the world of the scholars. But anyway, this fellow treats Dr. Goodspeed as if he's the master of artificial intelligence, a representative of God on earth, because according to him, there's no record to this, absolutely nothing. Copies are in the Congressional Library in Washington, D.C., but they say they have no such letters, and that's kind of all the argument. So that's our evangelical resource. And then we have another one, which is also very, very interesting. In fact, it's not an evangelical one, but is one from the academic environment, the University of North Carolina Press. And here we have, in matters of religion, the book of Edward G. Blum and Paul Harvey, White Jesus and the Publius Lentulus letter. Because having a white Jesus has become a huge problem today. And as it says here, in America, his image as a white man has been used both to justify the atrocities of white supremacy and to inspire the righteousness of civil rights crusades. Right? So we have this book called The Color of Christ, the Son of God, and the Saga of Race in America. So we move this on the ground of political correctness, and we attribute to God all the sins of the so-called Christians. Again, I would dearly direct you to the book called 12 Hours. You can find it here. Again, this is the Lord's website, the New Revelation. Here you can find an internet archive. If you click this the new revelation of Jesus Christ. It will open this. Here are all the books of the new revelation translated in English, and you can download 12 hours. But you can look in all the books of the new revelation and see that the Lord Jesus Christ doesn't promote any kind of racism, but universal love for all human beings. All human beings are his children. They all have a divine spirit of God. And in fact, the Lord is very, very upset with the false hypocritical Christians who turn on their brothers because they are weaker than them. They have another color of skin, have another culture, even they have another religion. This is absolutely judged and discouraged by the Lord. So, returning here, we see that a stumbling block that is dealt with in this research is the Publius Lentulus letter, which is significant. And by the way, here it says that it was written sometime between the 11th and the 15th century, which is a bit in disagreement with the assessment of Professor Gottfried, that it would be most probably from the 13th century. So they give us a bigger range. But they say here also that claim to come from, guess whom? A Roman proconsul during the time of Christ. So suddenly is not a government, but is a proconsul. And by the way, we know that there is a reference to a Roman consul in the book of Emperor Augustus, the deeds of Augustus. Yeah, but obviously this reference is not given here. And then they say the most fascinating thing about the letter is that before the Civil War, just about everyone knew that it was a fraud. There's no references to this. It's just a general assessment, anecdotal. Whenever Americans discussed it, and when we speak about Americans, the example given is the president of Yale University, Ezra Stiles. They admitted that it was a fake, and that the Bible said nothing of what Jesus looked like. Right, that's one thing, that the Bible doesn't say anything, and it's different from the letter being a fake. Again, you see the kind of language that always tries to create the impression that the assertion is generally accepted. This is not science, and this is not history, because obviously there have always been various opinions, and even Wikipedia gives us other opinions about this, and you'll see that many people have believed in this. And then it says here, but then between the Civil War and the Great Depression, white Americans transformed it into a believed truth. They started referencing it as a fact, starting making visual imagery based upon its description, and began claiming that it proved that the white race was supreme because God made it that way. Well, sorry, but in the previous video about the look of Jesus, we had a chance to look at a number of very old icons, including one from the 4th century, in which Jesus is depicted as a Caucasian man. And kind of most of the first icons were portraying him as white, sometimes even blonde, So, it wasn't the Americans after the Civil War that started presenting the Lord Jesus Christ as a white man, that's for sure. But guess who contradicted this? It was the civil rights movement that convinced Americans intellectually that Jesus could not have been white. Yeah, so they needed to be intellectually convinced, like they try these days, based on artistic depictions or using old Israeli skulls that a Middle Eastern person 2,000 years ago couldn't have been white, right? But the artwork inspired by the Publius Lentulus letter has continued to inspire people, very unfortunately. Yeah, so now in matters of the other arguments used in Wikipedia in regards to the letter being apocryphal, the use of Jesus Christ at that time is a problem. So it appears as during the Lord's lifetime, he was not called Christ, or Jesus Christ, or Jesus the Christ. So I have opened the Great Gospel of John. As I told you, you can find all the books here on the Internet Archive. And let's say just the mainly the first volume, although I looked in half of them. But let's speak about the first volume, which is here, Great Gospel of John. In this translation, you get 25 books, so this is the first of them. And look what I have found here. Right, we have Jesus presented as Christ in the Great Gospel of John, starting with the very first volume. So what we have here are scenes that correspond perfectly with verses of the Gospel of John, the biblical one, and of the other Gospels also. But let's say we have John 1:20-28, because that's what the translators have put here. But obviously, for what we have from the known Gospels, you will see here an entire scene, and of course with a much more developed language, so you can understand better what happened in a quite cinematic manner. So here is the scene when John the Baptist denies that he is Christ, the promised Messiah. So you can say that this has been written, the biblical Gospel of John has been written after the Lord's death on earth. It appears that the scholars consider this to be the truth. The New Revelation, a Great Gospel of John, makes pretty clear that John has been taking notes about the Lord's life and teaching during these 3 years of missionary work of the Lord, in which he was close to him as a disciple. And here we have the real words as they are presented by the Lord, the real words and facts happening at the time, not afterwards. So what it says here is that John said, so you see the verse in the scripture is, John answered them saying, I baptize only with water. He, the Christ about whom you are asking, is standing among you, but you do not know him. And what he really said was, but John said, I baptize only with water, which means I wash hearts that have become unclean for a worthy reception of the one who, as it were, has been in your midst already for quite some time, but whom you do not recognize because of your blindness. Here also, this is the Lord speaking, all those who seek me, the Lord, somewhere outside, are represented by the emissaries who travel over lands and seas, asking all the sages, where is Christ? When and where will he be coming? The true one who built a dwelling place for himself in their hearts, and who can be found only there. All these deluded seekers, him they do not seek, at least not at the only place where he must be sought and can be found. Further on, corresponding to verse 39 in John chapter 4, many Samaritans of that city came to believe in him initially because of the woman's testimony. That's the woman at the well, about whom we find a lot of things in this first volume of the Great Gospel of John. Her name was Irhael. So the Lord says here in the New Revelation, for there were some among them, among the Samaritans, who were well versed in the scripture. They said, this one speaks like David, who says, the Lord's decrees are true and righteous, every one, more to be desired than gold, pure gold in plenty, sweeter than syrup or honey from the comb. My desire is to do thy will, Lord, and thy law is in my heart. In the great assembly, I have proclaimed what is right. I do not hold back my words, as you know, O Lord. I have not kept thy goodness hidden in my heart. I have proclaimed thy faithfulness and saving power, and not concealed thy unfailing love and truth from the great assembly. So that was a quotation that these people were able to give. But we know, said the Samaritans, and that is our witness full of truth and power, that he who thus speaks and acts, as before him David spoke and acted, and that in his name is truly the promised Messiah. Until this one, after David, no one has spoken and acted like David. Therefore, this one must unfailingly be the Christ, the anointed of God from eternity. Therefore, we will wholly accept him. So this can be found in the Great Gospel of John, book 1, chapter 31. In the same book, corresponding to John chapter 4, verse 25, says the woman, that's the woman at the well, Irhael, I know that the Messiah is coming, who will be called Christ. When he comes, he will surely tell us everything that you have not told me. So what is she saying? In fact, this we find in the Great Gospel of John, Book 1, chapter 28. Now the woman, her cheeks still flushed, says with great emotion, Lord, you wisest prophet of God, I do know that the promised Messiah is to come and that his name will be Christ. When he comes, will he not be able to proclaim to us only what you have now told me? Right? So we find Christ again. Again, from Book 1, chapter 42, which is called Sermon on the Mount, clearly explained by Nathanael. We know he is one of the Lord's disciples. He's speaking here with the high priest. Replies Nathanael, are you of such a closed mind that you cannot grasp a clearly given teaching in its true sense? Have not practically all the prophets predicted that Christ would open his mouth to speak to the people only in parables? Says the high priest. Yes, you are right. That is how it is written. And further on, in chapter 46, which is called Return at Sihar, cleaning of a leper, we see how the high priest was converted by this miracle. The high priest was also greatly astonished and said, if a doctor had told me, look, I am going to cure this man, I would have only laughed and said, oh, you fool, go to the Euphrates and try to bail it out. Each bucketful drawn will be replaced by 100,000. However, it should still be easier for you to drain the Euphrates than to restore health to this man whose flesh has already begun to decompose. And the man whom we have now recognized as the Messiah managed to do this with a single word. In truth, this suffices us. He is definitely Christ. We do not need any further proof. And further on, following these words, he runs to me that is close to the well, falls at my feet and says, Lord, do stop just for a moment that I may worship you, for you are not only Christ, a Son of God, but God himself, clothed in the flesh with us. This is absolutely amazing because it's a recognition that many of the apostles still didn't have at this time, but this converted Pharisee really had, and is given here in Book 1. So I hope right now it's pretty clear that the term Christ was used at the time when the Lord was living in the flesh, according to the great Gospel of John, the direct word of the Lord, in which he presents exactly what has been spoken and what has happened during these 3 years before his crucifixion. Of course, not everything, but the most relevant things for the new Christianity that will start after his second coming. Yeah, right now we have discussed the arguments of this letter being apocryphal, and we have found that there was a Publius Lentulus indeed, and most of these resources that deem the letter to be fraudulent do not quote this, the deeds of the divine Augustus of the Roman emperor, that mentions Publius Lentulus as a Roman consul. Yeah, and also the fact that Jesus Christ was used at that time as for prophet of truth and sons of men. I think the so-called Hebrew idioms are quite natural expressions, so it really doesn't sound like an argument. And let's consider also that this is very much in agreement with the portrait from the New Revelation, the Gifts of Heaven, and also the ones given in the Archbold volume by Gamaliel and Pontius Pilate. So, yeah. We also have a very important reference of Flavius Josephus about Jesus in his book, The Antiquities of the Jews, written in the first century, around 93-94 AD. And they say here, there are in fact two references to this. There's one in Book 18 stating that Jesus was the Messiah. It's commonly called the Testimonium Flavianum. And there's another one in Book 20, Chapter 9, mentioning the brother of Jesus who was called Christ, whose name was James, which is true according to the Bible and the New Revelation, the Great Gospel of John, and the childhood of Jesus. So we see a first use of the name Christ referring to Jesus here. And as far as the Testimonium Flavianum is concerned, the statement is here in translation: about this time there lived Jesus, a wise man, if indeed one ought to call him a man, for he was one who performed surprising deeds and was a teacher of such people as accept the truth gladly. He won over many Jews and many of the Greeks. He was the Christ. And when upon the accusation of the principal man among us, Pilate had condemned him to a cross, those who had first come to love him did not cease. He appeared to them, spending a third day restored to life, for the prophets of God had foretold these things, and 1,000 other marvels about him. And the tribe of the Christians, so called after him, has still to this day not disappeared. So this is said to be not necessarily an authentic paragraph. So nothing else in this book is challenged, but this testimony concerning Jesus is a matter of contention. And what they give us here in Wikipedia is 3 perspectives on authenticity according to these 2 authors. 1 is entirely authentic, 2 is entirely a Christian forgery, 3, it contains Christian interpolations in what was Josephus' authentic material about Jesus. And we have arguments for complete authenticity, and we see that until the rise of modern criticism, many scholars believe that this was nearly or completely authentic with little or no so-called Christian interpolations. But here comes the paraphrase model appearing in 2022. And there are arguments for Christian interpolations. There are internal arguments. There are external arguments, arguments from silence, because this is not mentioned by certain authors, right? They have found similar testimoniums that lack the Christian terminology, and so on. There's a lot written about this, isn't it? So now, if they take out the so-called 3 divisive elements, that he was the Christ, though we see that the other reference to the brother of Jesus show us Jesus as the Christ anyway, right? The issue to, is it lawful to call him a man, which may suggest his divinity, right? And the reference to resurrection, the result is the following. Now, there was about this time Jesus, a wise man, for he was a doer of startling deeds, a teacher of such men as received the truth with pleasure. And he gained a following both among many Jews and many of Greek origin. And when Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal man amongst us, condemned him to the cross, those that loved him at the first did not forsake him. And the tribe of Christians, so named from him, are not extinct at this day. And with this they are happy, and Jesus is a simple sage, a wise man of the Jews. He was not divine, he was not the Son of God, he was not resurrected. And yeah, but this argument makes him acceptable to almost any other faiths and religion, especially Islam, isn't it? And also the Talmud, which doesn't recognize Jesus' divinity, obviously. In reality, what we can find here in the Antiquities of the Jews, translated by William Winston, sounds a bit different. Let me see. That's the fragment referring to the brother of Jesus, Jesus who was called Christ. Finally, here in chapter 3 from book 18, called The Sedition of the Jews against Pontius Pilate, concerning Christ and what befell Paulina and the Jews at Rome, we can find here, now there was about this time Jesus, a wise man, if it be lawful to call him a man. for he was a doer of wonderful works, a teacher of such men as received the truth with pleasure. He drew over to him both many of the Jews and many of the Gentiles. He was the Christ. And when Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal men amongst us, had condemned him to the cross, those that loved him at the first did not forsake him. For he appeared to them alive again the third day, as the divine prophet had foretold this and 10,000 other wonderful things concerning him. And the tribe of Christians, so named from him, are not extinct at this day. Right, so coming back to this perspectives on authenticity, this author Paul Meyer states that the first case, being entirely authentic, is generally seen as hopeless. Very scientific language, given that as a Jew, Josephus would not have claimed Jesus as the Messiah. Let's remember this. And that the second option is hardly tenable given the presence of the passage in all extant Greek manuscripts. Thus, a large majority of modern scholars accept the third alternative, partial authenticity. So they cannot really spread the idea that is entirely a Christian forgery. In fact, this is the only challenge in this work of Josephus. But they just suggest some intrusions, as they suggest about the entire Bible and the Gospels. So there's nothing new about anything. Let's see, why would Josephus, as a Jew, not claim Jesus as the Messiah? What's the deal with Josephus? Flavius Josephus first sounds very Roman to me, isn't it? So here we find out that he was a Roman Jewish historian and military leader. And if you look at his history, although he first fought the Roman Empire, he defected completely to the Roman side after 67 AD, when he surrendered to the Roman army and he was made a prisoner. And then during the reign of Vespasian, reign who he predicted was granted his freedom and assumed his family name of Flavius. And from then on, he became a Roman citizen, an advisor and friend of Vespasian's son Titus, and even cooperated with them during the famous siege of Jerusalem, when Jerusalem was destroyed, as a translator. So now, what is with him being faithful to the Jewish tradition, not acknowledging Jesus as the Messiah in 94? Because he wrote the book Antiquities of the Jews in 94. And that's a quarter of a century after he went to Rome. And 24 years after he became a Roman citizen. It even seems that his original audience may not have been primarily the Jews, because he's explaining basic Judean language, customs, and laws, which indicate an eventual Gentile audience. It says here that was very popular writer with Christians in the 4th century and beyond as an independent witness to the events before, during, and after the life of Jesus of Nazareth. And on the Jewish side, Josephus was far more obscure, as he was perceived as a traitor. We can understand why. So definitely this argument of Paul Meyer that Josephus as a Jew would not have claimed Jesus as the Messiah is very weak. But let's just stick with this thing, because it is of the greatest importance to observe how all these sources that affirm the divinity of Christ, are very much under assault today, and coming particularly from so-called Christian theologians. And let's remember the incredible number of translations of the Bible that we can find today. That we have discussed a bit about this in another video, and see that from older ones like King James and Geneva Bible to the so-called the Message or the Voice, very new ones, which resemble very little with the Bibles, with the scriptures now. So everything is debatable. On one side is this is the way it should be. It's a period of immense spiritual fermentation. But on the other side, there is a tendency which can be detected of obscuring the authors and the works which emphasize the reality of the Christian Gospels and of the divinity of the Lord and of his supernatural resurrection, of his atonement and redemption of humanity. So there is a suppression of these sources and a promotion of those who present the Lord as just a prophet or just a wise man or an activist or a person of a local cultural importance, and eventually even a mythological creation. Look, here we have a variety of resources on YouTube in which the issue of the existence of Jesus is brought over. This is a channel with a huge audience. And in this talk, this Testimonium Flavianum from the Antiquities of the Jews is given. But of course, as problematic and not necessarily as we have read in the document, we also find a quotation of Tacitus, a mentioning of the Gnostic Gospels found at Nag Hammadi in 1945, a mentioning of the Gospel of Thomas, which is also a Gnostic one, in which you'll find no crucifixion. It has nothing to do with a new revelation also. You find references to other religions such as Baha'i and Islam, in which again we find the figure of Jesus as a remarkable man, a great prophet, but not as a son of God or God as a divine person incarnate with a mission to atone for the sins of people and bring redemption, and nothing about his resurrection. And finally, it says that the scholars' consensus is that Jesus existed, but merely as a historical man. Here there's another similar video, Did Jesus Really Exist? A historical investigation from the History Hub. And here they start speaking about the perspective of the Quran, which appeared 600 years later. So it seems in which obviously kind of everybody knows that Jesus was the prophet that preceded Muhammad. And then they give us Pliny the Younger, which in 112 AD spoke about the Christians, the followers of Christ. He was not among them, obviously. They speak about the pilot stone, as the main artifact that testifies about the existence of Pontius Pilate, which is contradicted, by the way, in Wikipedia's page about Pilate, because it appears that he is one of the most documented Roman procurators of Judea. And then it speaks about the opposers of Christianity bringing such arguments as a lack of writings concerning Jesus at his time. So if you don't consider this letter of Lentulus or the Archko volume, for example, there is a lack of writings. Then another argument would be that there have been in other religions mythological heroes with similar lives. We know that this has been presented a lot in New Age books and in lectures such as those of David Icke's arguments against Christianity, but they are explained in the new revelation because all these prophets or initiates in religions that came before Christianity were in fact precursors of the Lord. So each one of them was meant to more or less symbolize the Lord and his destiny. So it is a spiritual ancestry, so to say. And further on, another argument would be the inconsistencies and differences between the accounts of Jesus' life that we can find in scriptural gospels. And if you read the Gifts of Heaven, I think it's in volume 3. Again, you can find them here. The Gifts of Heaven. I think it's here in volume 3. You can find a lot about this mysteries of the Gospels. We'll probably speak about this also. What is the source of these inconsistencies? But yeah, obviously they can be explained from both a psychological, spiritual, and historical perspective, and all of them are touched by the Lord in the gifts of heaven. But the idea is that all of them are practically endorsed by the Lord and made to harmonize, which I don't think any human brain could have done. So here's another video from Metatron, another mega channel, called Is Jesus Historical? What do the Romans say about him? And yeah, this young man is quoting a number of Roman sources that are referring to Christians in general and not Christ generally in a negative way. He speaks about Gaius Suetonius Tranquillus, Pliny the Younger, that we discussed about, Lucian of Samosata, who also mocks the Christians, Marabar Serapion of Syria, which speaks about the destiny of the people that commit sins against their leaders, and particularly the Jews who had been driven out after killing their king. Obviously the king could have been just the Lord. Also, he mentions the Jewish Talmud, who presents a completely different story about the Jesus, and says that he was hanged for sorcery and enticing the Israelite people to apostasy, and that happened on the eve of Passover, 40 days after publishing this through messengers across the country. So an eventual defender of Jesus would appear, which didn't happen, obviously. So these are the resources mentioned here. And yeah, this young man believes that the Romans would have never believed somebody like Jesus, that his birth would have meant nothing. And this is quite funny, because if you read the childhood of Jesus, you discover that important Roman figures like Cyrenius and Cornelius, who were often imperial descendants, were close to the Lord even from the time of his infancy. And later on, there's other important figures such as Agrippa, Captain Julius Marinus Spila, and many other Romans who have been converted to the Lord's teaching. And indeed, much easier than many Jews. So that's to understand that it wasn't just Jews, converted Jews, that have imported Christianity to Rome and generally to the vast Roman Empire, but the Romans themselves, and some of them with huge authority. Right, but definitely he doesn't know anything about the new revelation and probably would not be at all concerned about it. This is Paul Williams, who has given up Christianity for Islam. I don't know if he's a theologian or a professor, but he's got a very big audience too. And he explains here that Jesus was not crucified according to first century Christians. And guess what the argument is? That Bishop Ignatius of Antioch, also made saint afterwards, complains that there are some Christians that deny that Jesus has died on the cross. But yeah, we know that because even at that time there were already Gnostic Gospels in which Jesus was viewed as a great teacher, as a prophet eventually, but just a human being. And obviously the supernatural resurrection was not confirmed. I would just suggest, yeah, here is his story. It's an interesting matter of theology and, the meaning of Trinity, which gets the full answer and explanation in the New Revelation. God is just one. It's not three different persons. So the Son of God is, in fact, God himself in his aspect as wisdom. The Father is the love of God, or the essential aspect of God, and the Holy Spirit is the manifestation of the power, the will of God. and they are all three in one. That's why the Lord said, the Father is in me and I am in the Father. Practically, the Spirit in Jesus is the Father, the eternal, essential love in God that is ruling the entire creation. And I would just suggest that maybe somebody who's interested in this problem of Islam and the differences in the way Jesus is presented in Islam as being just a prophet could be definitely interested to watch some presentations of Dr. J. Smith, in which he brings a lot of, in my view, a lot of compelling arguments why the historicity of this religion is very much debatable, and there's a variety of resources and a lot of contradictions also. But the reality is that these days, the contradictions in the Gospels are also becoming more and more stumbling block, especially in social media. But even so, they cannot both be true. So either you have the older variant of the Gospels in which Jesus was God incarnate and he died on the cross, the Nicene Creed, or you have the new Jesus of the Quran, who was a Muslim, same as all the other prophets and patriarchs before him, and who preached obedience to God and didn't die on the cross and was not resurrected. So you cannot have both. The new revelation, as we know, obviously supports and confirms and expands this Christianity of the scriptural Gospels. So, of course, there are other variants about Jesus, like this taken from the Urantia book, that was created between 1924 and 1955, seemingly through mediumistic channeling. But anyway, the important thing is that here, this Jesus is not, of course, the Jesus of the Gospels. There are some similarities. He was both human and divine, the Son of God incarnate. So this is a bit better than in Islam, that he performed many of the miracles described in the Bible, and so on. He taught the 12 apostles. He was crucified. Then he rose from the dead. He will return to the world again someday. But on the other hand, this crucifixion is not considered an atonement for the sins of humanity. It's thought to be an outcome of the fears of religious leaders of the day, right? So doesn't have a spiritual meaning. Jesus is considered a human incarnation of Michael of Nebadon. So definitely he is not the second person of Trinity or God incarnate. Jesus was born on earth through natural means, did not walk on water. Yeah, so the most important thing is that he is not God incarnate, and his spiritual mission is not recognized. And as we can find here, there's many other interesting things, such as Jesus is the creator of the local universe, not of everything that exists. And by the way, as a co-equal female partner, something like a wife, isn't it? Yeah. But after all this, I would also recommend this Jesus Outside the Bible, the top 10 historical references presented by Brian Windle. And he starts speaking about the Christian writers from the first century that confirmed the gospel, obviously, and then moves on to non-Christian sources, authors such as Phlegon, quoted by Origen in 140 AD, Thallus from AD 55, quoted by Julius Africanus later on, Celsus, quoted by Origen in 175, Lucian of Samosata, we mentioned this before, in 166 AD. All these obviously are against Christians. 73 AD, Mara bar Serapion. Yeah, we spoke about this, about the Jews killing their king. 112 AD, Pliny the Younger. 120 AD, Suetonius. And finally, 93 AD, Flavius Josephus. And they mention the disputed Testimonium Flavianum, And I want to give you exactly what he is saying about the Testimonium Flavianum, because what he's saying about Testimonium Flavianum is that indeed the known translations may be a matter of contention, but they found, I think, an Arabic version which seems to be more acceptable. Let's listen to him.
One of our favorite historians is Flavius Josephus. He had something to say about Jesus, and if so, what is it, Brian?
Yeah, and this is a bit of a controversial passage. Well, one of them is. Josephus actually mentions Jesus twice in his work, the Antiquities of the Jews. And writing at the end of the first century, he is describes Jesus in particular. Now, there is a controversial passage that it's called the Testimonium Flavianum, and it almost all scholars, Christians and non-Christians, believe that it was edited by a later Christian scribe to make Jesus look really good. But there was a copy found that did not have those edits in it. Probably what was originally written by Josephus. It was discovered in 1970. It's an Arabic version. And it is the kind of thing that a Jew like Josephus might write about Jesus. It says this: at that time there was a wise man who was called Jesus. His conduct was good, and he was known to be virtuous. And many people from among the Jews and other nations became his disciples. Pilate condemned him to be crucified and to die, but those who had become his disciples did not abandon his discipleship. They reported that he had appeared to them 3 days after his crucifixion, and that he was alive. Accordingly, he was perhaps the Messiah, concerning whom the prophets have recounted wonders. Historian Paul Meyer notes, clearly this version of the passage is expressed in a manner appropriate to a non-Christian Jew, and it corresponds almost precisely to previous scholarly projections of what Josephus actually wrote. And so this is important, but Josephus actually referred to Jesus a second time when he talks about the death of James, quote, the brother of Jesus, who was called Christ. And so from these references, we know that Josephus accepted the existence of Jesus historically, who was called Christ. His conduct was good. He was crucified by Pilate. Many people came as disciples and reported that he was alive after his death.
Yeah.
Yeah, so since he admittedly used the term Christ for Jesus, there's no problem to allow Christ to stay in the context, right? Because what they have taken was that he was the Christ, isn't it? They say he was probably the Messiah. Anyway, I would recommend this video, especially because these days, due to the generalized confusion, people try to find shorter ways to discover the universal truth of all things. Look at this 1 million view. And what it says is what AI said about Jesus and the end of the world will shock you. Yeah, this is ChatGPT that she asked about Jesus and the end of the world. And it is about Elon Musk's brain chip, about AI in itself and, the advent of false prophets, about the revelation of John, the mark of the beast and the surveillance system. So it appears to be very consistent with the opinions of many evangelical people, and not only evangelical, that try to, find some correspondences between the terms and the events described in the revelation of John and what they see it's happening today in our world of weirdness and confusion. So it's nothing else, nothing different than this perspective. In the end, it's easily digestible by these Christians. However, the new revelation doesn't confirm this mark of the beast. And I have spoken about this in a couple of presentations. The mark of the beast is the mark of Satan, which is pride or selfishness. And from this perspective, it's spiritual and psychological. And the people who adhere to this in their minds, in their intellectual pride or in their deeds, they are guided by this sinful pride, are the ones who are marked. The rest are just applications in real life. And of course, technology in itself is absolutely dead, although there are various opinions here. My view, whatever AI is bringing is, though they say it's creative, it's whatever you put in it. There's no creativity. And by the way, we have a portrait of Jesus from AI that used a quotation from Isaiah. Where was this? Isaiah 53, which is, as we know from the New Revelation spiritual language, speaking about the Lord and his passion, that he was despised and esteemed not. He was stricken, afflicted, and there was no beauty that we should desire him. And based on this, taken literally as the Christians like to do generally, and to worship the letter, and adding some various anthropological details,
but
we will see the result.
sorry, but that hair. I mean, it's great for a romance book cover, but it's so impractical for a fisherman. And that's not to mention that the first depictions of Jesus in historical art had his hair short. Also, short hair was favored and even encouraged by Jesus' apostles in the New Testament, so it makes sense that a shorter crop would have been the dude that did the job, so to speak. Okay, so it's better, but he's supposed to be a Middle Eastern, right? So I don't think the blue eyes are going to work. Let's swap those out. Okay, that's a little better, but still his skin is so white, right? I mean, Jesus wasn't white. You know that, right? Jesus wasn't white. I mean, he wasn't white ethnically, but also people of his time were basically outside under the sun all the time, so his skin would be a pretty dark complexion. And for that matter, his features would be much more Eastern Mediterranean. And in addition, he would look older than the modern 33-year-old. And that's because we spend a lot of time inside, not under the sun. But being constantly sunbaked has that effect on your epidermis. So, okay, that feels more accurate. I think we're getting there, but we're still not quite there yet. Now, I know this might be a bit of a shock, but balding among Jewish men has a tendency to set in a little younger than some other ethnic populations. It's researched. You can look it up. So I'm not saying that Jesus was bald for sure, but by 33, it's reasonable to think that Jesus might have had some male pattern baldness setting in. Now, here's the kicker. And
Right. So, yeah, we also have to remember that in those days there weren't so many poisons around. People were not injected, irradiated. There were no chemicals in foods. Water was generally drinkable. So the nature was not polluted with nanoparticles. But anyway, yeah, that's the result the wonderful omniscient AI gives us. According to this guy's input, that's what you can get. There's no spirit in technology, obviously. I mean, you can try to simulate everything, but not the living spirit of God. That cannot be reproduced, honey. So anyway, we have the apostle of the new humanity, Homo Deus, Yuval Noah Harari. Everybody knows him. And he also seems to be quite confused from my point of view. I mean, yeah, he either endorses AI, for example, here. As a matter of fact, he says the AI could start the next big religion because, of course, until now, all the scriptures were written by human beings, but we need something that is superhuman. And what is superhuman? It's just one thing, AI, much smarter than humans, because besides intelligence, of course, there's nothing that matters. But on the other hand, other things matter to him too, or at least that's what he's saying. He describes Christianity becoming popular as an accident of nature. Of course, in the perspective of atheists, everything in reality, up to human consciousness, love, everything is an accident. It could have been totally different. This, in fact, is not substantiated in real science. But anyway, he's a historian and a philosopher. He believes that humans have no soul. They're hackable animals, and the Bible and Jesus are fake news. Yeah, and if the Bible is fake news and AI can do a better Bible, yeah, of course he would endorse this. On the other hand, he also warns people about AI, He warns people about this technology that can hack them, biologically, intellectually, that can control people. But everything is unavoidable. AI and the useless class or the useless eaters, which is obviously very, very dangerous. He also envisaged a future in which humanity will be extinct. In fact, there is a chapter at the end of his book, Sapiens, which is about the extinction of humanity, because, of course, the new race, the superhumans, Homo Deus, will appear. And this will be as a result of this influx of the biotechnology and AI, the fourth industrial revolution, when finally people will take their destiny into their own hands. So that's where we are heading. And this is not as strange as it may be. I mean, if you look at the comments there, you can find that many people are rejecting his theory. He may not be very appealing, but he doesn't need to be appealing to the masses if the rulers of the world are endorsing him and he dictates the path for politicians and the new authorities of the new world. So, yeah, this is the way we are heading. And that's why I think it is important to look back on all these incredibly important historical and spiritual resources that today are either denied or ignored. And in my very small measure, I try to point to them from the perspective mainly of the new revelation. Because no matter how much confusion it is spread, and the Lord speaks about confusion as being the spirit of the Antichrist, that will characterize this time. So no matter how much confusion they will spread, the light, the flashing of light that will come from the east to the west, from the spiritual world, from heaven to the material world through the pure sciences, will be impossible to be stopped by any human means. AI and their fourth revolution will not be able to stop anything. Matter in itself is more or less nothing when dealing with spiritual powers. Yeah, but a lot of damage can be inflicted, and it is inflicted on people these days, biologically, psychologically, and spiritually, because of this great confusion. Well, I would say just hold on. Keep your love, keep your conscience and your faith, because the Lord is drawing nearer and nearer to each of our hearts and nearer to his most visible appearance, not physical, but spiritual, that will change humanity forever and will save the earth as the cradle of the children of God. So that was my presentation for today. Thank you very much. And hope to see you soon. God bless all the people of goodwill.